Okay, welcome. So today is our Relaxing the Health, Wealth, and Happiness meeting, and it's nice to have you here. So, as some of you know, last week we had a storm here in southern Vermont that knocked out the power for the week. And you might think that given the amount of time, uh, I would have something brilliant to say today. That had all this time. What was I doing with myself other than surely I was working up something brilliant to share on Monday, but that would not be true. So, what I would like to invite us to today is to take a fresh look at the invitation that is always available, which is to relax into health, wealth, and happiness. And to take a fresh look at that, I'd like to uh, explore something that should be perhaps obvious to us, but is probably not. So we'll start with this, which is something a little bit cute and a little bit uh, well, cute, I suppose, which is to consider the word assume. So the word assume, maybe you know what that means, to assume. But the cute thing is that to assume, so maybe it's a bit of a spelling lesson first. Assume is spelled Assume. So the cute thing about assume is that to assume is to make an ass out of you and me. I'll let you figure that out. But it's actually true. And so I'd like to invite us to consider the assumptions that we make and how they get us into trouble, and not so much, although they do get us into trouble in the maybe conventional sense, but in the more painful sense, in the more intimate sense, they get us into trouble because every time we make an assumption, we are playing a trick on ourselves that is very painful because we are overlooking something that should be obvious. And so what should be obvious is what becomes non-obvious because we're making the assumption. So the assumption is like we've just put up a blinder. And prior to putting up the blinder, we had a clear view. Everything was perfectly wide open. We could see everything. But then we make the assumption and we can't see the clarity any longer because now we have this blinder right in front of our eyes. And so instead of seeing what's there, we see what it is that we're assuming, but we don't know that we're doing that. We think that we see, this is the trick that we've made. We've just played on ourselves. We think that that we're seeing what's there. We don't realize that we're seeing our assumption. And some of these assumptions we make are so, we make them so often that we don't even, we repeat them so frequently, they seem to become solid. And they seem to be so long lasting that we fail to recognize that they're not the truth. So we mistake them for the truth. Not just what we're seeing, not just what we assume to be there, but what we actually take to be the truth. And I think that probably there are many assumptions, and I've invited us to explore this before, and I don't know how much detail we'll get into today. But I want to be clear, there are many assumptions, so you could notice that for yourself. I would suggest it's a helpful exercise that you could take into your life, just to start to notice, invite yourself in situations, just to ask yourself, what assumptions am I making in this moment? What assumptions am I making about this situation? What assumptions am I making about my life? What assumptions am I making about this relationship? What assumptions am I making about this other person, etc.? All of which can be very helpful. But particularly, I'd like to look at, I think, the most fundamental assumption that we make. I'd like to look at a little bit more detail at that today, which is the assumption that I know who I am. So I make the assumption, which is a terrible assumption to make, but particularly because, well, I won't even say particularly, it's just a terrible assumption to make that I know who I am. But I make this assumption over and 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 over. And I really shouldn't, because there are many, it's not like it's a big secret. We're told in many ways that our assumption of who we are is incorrect. So now I know that this could be misunderstood, to be taken out of context, but there is a biblical quote from Psalms that it's praising the God of the Israelites. And at one point it says, he says, he meaning the God of the Israelites says, be still and know that I am God. Now, as I said, this could be misunderstood to what I'm going to propose about it. Could be it could be somebody could suggest that this is a misunderstanding or taken out of context, but I'll propose that the esoteric significance of this is not really even all that esoteric. It's actually plainly stated, be still and know that I am God. So if you really just take that literally, then you understand that it's stating really clearly, you are not who you think you are. It's not that I, who I think myself to be, am God. It's that I am God, that God is I. This is stated unequivocally in the Bhagavad Gita, when Krishna repeatedly tells Arjuna that Krishna is the self in all, the eternal supreme being, present in all that is. It's also stated fairly clearly in various Sanskrit expressions, such as aham brahmasmi, or om tat sat, which just basically means I am that. And so we're told this in various traditions. This is not really hidden, but it's like hidden in plain view, I guess. It's not kept secret, other than we keep it secret from ourselves by making assumptions about who we are. See, what happens is we hear these statements, and then rather than taking it at face value, rather than receiving it as it really is in its clarity, we instead twist it and we insert an assumption about who we are, and then we receive it through that assumption. So we say, oh, this one here, the one that I assume that I am, is hearing this and interpreting this, and so I am to be, the one I assume myself to be, is being commanded to be still and know that I am God, which it's going to be twisted in various unhelpful ways at that point. Or if we're to understand Om Tat Sat, it's like, oh, I am that. I, the one I assume myself to be, am that. So we insert this unnecessary assumption about who I am, and then we interpret the truth through that assumption, and then the truth comes out distorted, and we walk around and we say, oh, I'm so confused. Why can't I understand? It's so simple. Why can't I understand? I am that. Why can't I understand it? So the reason you can't understand it is because you insert an assumption about who you are. So I want this is, I think, of enormous practical value, and so, but I don't imagine that it's necessarily obvious initially how this is of any practical value, because most of the time, I think we assume, here we go again, assuming, but we assume that our practical problems need to be solved in a particular way. And of course, they always need to be solved for me. I mean, who else? They need to be, clearly they need to be solved for me. I'm the one that has the problem, so they need to be solved for me, not for somebody else, because the other person doesn't have my problems. So it seems so logical and obvious. Oh, well, I have the problems, so I need to have those problems solved for me. But the have you noticed that doesn't tend to work? I mean, I've proposed previously that we get ourselves engaged in this game of whack-a-mole, so that, and I think everybody here is familiar with what I'm referring to by this point, but just in case somebody is scratching their head saying, what is he talking about? What is this whack-a-mole thing? You have to imagine, I don't know if they still do this, but imagine the 1980s in the middle of the United States, if you can imagine such a thing. It's a bit nightmarish. And there's a place called, what was it called? Went by various names. It was Chuck E. Cheese and some Showbiz Pizza is what it was called. It was this terrible establishment that was just like an arcade that also served pizza. And so whack-a-mole was one of their games. Imagine the fun involved. But the game is just a big box. You pay to play, of course, and it's a big box and mechanical box, and you've got a mallet, and you wait. There's a bunch of holes, and you wait for the mechanical mole to pop up, and then you're supposed to whack it. And then you wait, and then another one pops up through another hole, and you're supposed to whack it. And this is just the game. You just keep doing this. So this is what happens when we're trying to solve the problems of my life or me, is that we may have some success, we may fail. I mean, the thing is, if you succeed, then you succeed. If you fail, you fail. But regardless of whether you succeed or fail, then there'll be another thing that pops up. Now, this all maybe sounds a bit pessimistic, and I don't really intend it to be entirely pessimistic, because some of you should know that I'm not really against solving our problems. I think that solving our problems can be very useful, very helpful, but it has its limitations. So please don't misunderstand what I'm saying to say, oh, you should just wallow in all of your problems eternally and just keep your fingers crossed and hope that one day somehow miraculously you'll wake up from the nightmare. And I don't think that's a good solution. So solve your problems. This is fine. play whack-a-mole. You have to. I play whack-a-mole. I have to. It's important, and it's not separate really from what it is that the bigger point that I'm getting at. They go together really. And so I just want to be clear. I'm not saying don't solve your problems. You should solve your problems. It's good to solve your problems. It's important to solve your problems, but it's also important to keep them in the larger perspective so that you can get the larger value that's offered to you. Because if you don't realize that you're playing whack-a-mole, well, let's say this. If you realize that you're playing whack-a-mole, then you know you're playing whack-a-mole, and you just play whack-a-mole, and you don't really care all that much. I mean, you're like, hey, look, I'm at Showbiz Pizza. Here's whack-a-mole. I've got nothing better to do. I'm gonna whack the things. But then you've got it in the right perspective, and you know what you're doing and where you are, and you don't have to take it in the wrong way. Because imagine if you took it in the wrong way and you thought this is a very serious matter, and if I don't get that, I don't whack the mole and keep that mole down forever. I've got to kill the mole. I've got to really kill it. I can't just whack it. I've got to kill it. I've got to cut its head off. Then you're like the kid is told to never come back to Showbiz Pizza because you've broken their whack-a-mole game because you took it too seriously. So you don't want to do that. But if you know you're playing whack-a-mole, it's not a problem. And maybe it's good. Maybe it's important. Maybe it's an important part of the development process for certain people like me to go through this initiatory experience of Showbiz Pizza whack-a-mole. You've got to go through it. You've got to have that experience. And so it's important to have that experience and to learn from it. This is the thing: is if we don't learn, then we don't receive the benefits that we're here to receive. We don't discover what it is that we're here to discover. We don't get the value of it. So we just become embittered, cynical, hardened, and we just get stuck in an relatively cosmically infantile stage of development because we're just wrestling with whack-a-mole. It's is it Jacob? I think is it Jacob who wrestles with the being, the various translations. Sometimes an angel, sometimes some other kind of being, but it's some being. But it doesn't wrestle and endlessly. It's for the night. So we have to go through this phase. We have to have the experience, but we have to be present. We have to learn from it. We have to have it in the right perspective. But if we don't have that perspective, as I said, we just get stuck. And then we mistakenly think this is it. This is all there is. And then we're just, why is it like this? Why is it so miserable? Why did God create such a terrible reality? This is the kind of thinking that we get stuck in, which is obviously unhelpful and only contributes to misery. So we want to learn to help ourselves. So where was I? Where did I went off on this ridiculous tangent about Showbiz Pizza and whack-a-mole? But the idea here is that we have these problems and we're wanting to solve the problems for me. And on a certain level, it's necessary. And it's part of the process because it helps us to learn what we're here to learn so that we can receive the benefits that we're here for. Maybe you've heard this suggestion before that Earth is a school, and maybe you roll your eyes like I have been known to do. It's such a suggestion, but actually it's really quite a helpful way to understand it, that you realize, oh, I've been I think there's a certain kind of humility that comes through enough pain that can bring a person to the point of realizing maybe I've been looking at this in the wrong way. And when you realize that maybe you've been looking at this in the wrong way, then you might start to be open to what might be a more helpful way to see this. And when you are at that point, then you might realize actually it's the way I've been seeing things is just sort of like this is all miserable, endlessly miserable. I have no volition. I'm blind. I don't know what anything is. I don't know what the purpose of anything is. I don't know what my purpose is. I don't know who I am. I don't know what any of this is. I don't know anything. Nobody knows anything. It's the blind leading the blind. It's a terrible, awful thing that's going on. That's how I've been seeing it. And when I realize, well, that's not helpful, there's no way out when I'm looking at it that way, then I might have a certain level of humility that could open me to the possibility that maybe there might be other ways of seeing it that might be more helpful. And one of those ways of seeing it that might be more helpful would be, oh, perhaps there's something here that I am to learn. So we need to solve our problems because it's part of the learning process, but we also, I'm proposing, want to see as best as we can, we want to be open to a larger perspective on the whole thing. And see if a metaphor might be, or an analogy perhaps might be useful here. So along the same lines of a school, think about if you're imagine that you're a child and you're attending school. Maybe you had this experience. So you could imagine that you're attending school, but now imagine that you have no understanding of what this institution is. You don't know what the purpose of it is. You don't know what the progression is. You don't know where it's going. You don't know why you're doing it. You don't have any idea about any of it. You're just in the dark about all of that. And so all you know is that day in and day out, you have to go and do these things, and you don't really like it particularly. And you don't understand anything about it. You might imagine that's not going to be very nice. So that's a bit like playing whack-a-mole and you've got whack-a-mole myopia. You can't see the forest for the trees. All you know is I'm doing this stupid, miserable thing that I don't like. But if you have a larger perspective, then it's like you realize, oh, I'm in school. I'm in grade 3. And next year, all goes well, I'll be in grade 4. And the year after that, I'll be in grade 5, and so forth and so on. And eventually I'll graduate, and then I'll go into the next stage of my life. So that might be more helpful, right? That you kind of have the larger perspective to understand what you're doing, the context. So I'm proposing similarly, yes, we have to solve our problems, but if we do it continually making the assumption that we know who we are, then we're blinding ourselves to the larger context, and all of it becomes absolutely pointless because we will sooner or later be brought to our knees and realize that I can't possibly solve all of my problems. They just keep coming. There'll always be another problem. I solve this problem, and then another one comes up, and then I solve that problem, and another one comes up. And I can't even imagine what the problems might be in the future because because I'm not that developed yet. See, that's an indication that there's a process of maturation going on. We haven't escaped that. It's not like you turn 21 and okay, now it's all the maturation's done. Good luck. No, it continues. So but you think about the child, the 5-year-old, well, I guess Freud might argue against this, but in general, the 5-year-old can't understand uh, sexual feelings, sexual desires, because they haven't reach that stage of their development. There's a certain stage of development that changes take place in the body, and this brings about new experiences that were not previously possible. So in similar ways, as we continue through our experience of this life, changes continue to take place that bring about new possibilities that we previously had not even imagined. We hadn't even considered that such a thing might be possible. Even if we've heard about it, we we just couldn't understand it. So I'm presently 44 years old. Um, I have Uranus transiting opposite my natal Uranus, which, in other words, is a midlife crisis. And of course, everybody's heard of a midlife crisis. And those of you who are well past your midlife crisis, you say, oh, yeah, been there, done that. But you think back, when you were in your 20s, could you have really understood what that experience would be to get to that point in your life when all of a sudden there's this huge transition that you didn't anticipate because you didn't realize that you were even doing what you were doing. You didn't even realize that there was a particular arc to your life until that moment when when the arc actually arcs. Up to that, prior to that moment, you just seem like, oh, this is just happening. It's just going. And then all of a sudden it swings. There's an arc and you realize, holy cow, it's not at all what I thought. There's this change in direction. Something that was going up is now starting to come down. And so you couldn't anticipate that prior to that. I think about stupid example, but I think about this. There was this movie, which I can't think of the name of, but it had an actor whose name I can't think of. So this is all very helpful to you. But and I can't even tell you when it was made. It was made sometime in the last 20 years, I think, closer to 20 years ago than now. And it sort of highlighted the midlife crisis. And I remember seeing that movie, and it's like, oh, it's kind of funny. You can poke fun at it when you're not there, when you don't understand, when you don't have the life experience to give you compassion for it. And maybe it's funny anyway, but it's a very different thing to have the experience. And so we're always evolving. These things are continuing. There's constant possibilities for new experiences that as far as I can tell, there's no end to it, because the nature of the game is that it just keeps on changing. Something funny happened there and my window went away, but it's still here. Um, so we're constantly going to be given new opportunities for things to learn. Isn't it amazing how such a simple thing, I can take such a long-winded way of getting there? So in summary, so far, for the first half of today's Relaxing the Health, Wealth, and Happiness, change keeps happening. Possibilities for learning continue. That would be the sutra form. Sounds much more wise when stated that way. So the opportunities for learning continue, but if we don't have the larger context, if we're not understanding that all this taking place in a larger context, then it seems a bit like maybe like a prison sentence. There's I think a famous play by the French philosopher and playwright Jean Sartre, called No Exit. And the tagline, I think, is hell is other people. I've never actually seen the play, but I understand it's taking place in like a waiting room, and these people are all the people in the characters are all stuck in the waiting room, and it's just hell. Uh, but this is the kind of thing that I think people arrive at when they don't understand the larger context, when they think that all that is my assumptions, and they are blinded to their assumptions, and so they're just endlessly playing whack-a-mole, but it all seems absolutely pointless. It doesn't seem pointless up to a point, because you're working to get to a point, but when you get to that point, all of a sudden it becomes pointless, because you realize, well, what is the point if I've already, you know I'm just endlessly playing whack-a-mole. So yes, we have to solve our problems. It's important to do so, but the larger context is really important, because it helps us to understand why we need to learn, why it matters, who it matters for. So, because of course we say, well, it matters for me. Yes, it does. It matters for you. But the question is, who are you? Now I'm reminded of the Alice in Wonderland. But you have to sincerely question, who is it that I'm who is it that I am? And this is getting closer to the point here. Because if we're making this assumption all the time about who I am, and I'm proposing that this blinds us and gets us into a lot of trouble, deep pain that keeps us stuck in a narrow perspective, so that our lives start to feel pointless, endlessly painful, that we're stuck in a no exit situation, etc., etc., then we really want to start to look at our assumption and question that, and start to open up to something beyond our assumption. So remember, what I proposed from the beginning is that before we make the assumption, our view is perfectly clear, wide open. And the assumption is like putting a blinder up, so that instead of seeing this wide open clarity, we instead see the blinder. And of course, we project all kinds of things onto the blinder. And then we mistake that for reality. And I've promised that this is of practical value. So maybe it's not yet clear how it's of practical value, but I will attempt to clarify how it's of practical value. And then maybe, if possible, I will offer some suggestions for how you could practically help yourself to um, question the assumption in a helpful way, and and enjoy the benefits of doing so, so that you can open to uh, greater clarity and peace and potential in the moment. So not something that you have to put off into the future. It's not like you're investing into some retirement account that you're only going to be able to withdraw on in 50 years, but in the moment, alive, fresh right now, that you can actually receive the benefit of what I'm proposing. So this assumption, again, just to clarify, the many assumptions that we make, all of which get us into trouble, all of which cause us problems, all of which are worth investigating, and too many of them for us to do a lot with today. But we could look at this one fundamental and probably most difficult, troubling assumption that we make, which is the assumption that I know who I am. So in order to make this clearly of practical value, let's look at some specific example. So something that we probably all can relate to. So, how about relationship with other? So probably we all have some experience of relationship with other, and I'm leaving that open to whoever that might be. Relationship with parent, relationship with spouse, relationship with child, relationship with lover, relationship with neighbor, relationship with caregiver, whoever it might be, relationship with government worker, whatever it might be. But we have relationship challenges. So you think about maybe you have some kind of challenge that you can refer to. Maybe it's ongoing, maybe it's in the past, maybe it's recent, maybe it's in the distant past. But something that you can refer to in your own experience so that you can you can bring it home so that you can actually explore it for yourself and see how it's of value. Okay, so you have this relationship with this other person, and we want to look at a scenario in which you feel challenged. Maybe the person does something that you don't like, or maybe the person says something that you don't like, or maybe the person doesn't see it the way that you see it, and you feel it's very important that they should see it the way that you see it. Suppose there may be some other possibilities, but those are some good ones. Probably you could think of something there that you can relate to. Okay. So you have this conflict of some kind with this other person, and you have these feelings, these probably strong, unwanted feelings that are difficult for you. And notice in this situation, of course, it seems like there's a problem, right? I mean, there's a problem because you don't like it. And so, again, a lot of assumptions that we could look at, we could, look at the assumption that I don't like it. Is that true? How do I know that I don't like it? I don't know. How do I know that I don't like it? What's the basis of that? I mean, there are a lot of things that we could, a lot of angles that we could take on this. That we could look at various assumptions. There's so many little micro assumptions built into the whole thing. But let's pull it way back and just start from the first thing, which is I assume that I know who I am in this situation. So, I mean, clearly, if I'm having a problem, then right, it's not some my some other person is not having the problem. I'm having the problem. So there's an assumption about who I am because I'm assuming I know who I am who's having the problem. So we need to look at that though, because what if you were wrong? Let's just see the power of this. If you were wrong about who you are, then isn't it quite possible, likely even, that you don't even have a problem? If the one who you think has the problem is somebody who you're not, and you come to find out that who you are is someone else, then there's a pretty good chance that you don't even have a problem. The one who you thought you were had a problem. So it's very worth looking at. So now this might seem stupid, right? Because you might say, come on, Joey, this is another one of your stupid things that you're saying about something. It doesn't even make any sense. What do you mean I don't know who I am? Of course I know who I am. I'm the one who has the problem. I'm having the feelings. I don't like the feelings. It's so obvious and simple and straightforward. That's maybe just my thinking about it, my own resistant thinking. But maybe you have some of that. But consider sincerely, just come to this with an open mind, as I'm sure you already are, and consider. So I think I know who I am in the situation. I'm this one who has the problem. I'm the one who needs this to be different. I'm the one who who has these feelings. These are my feelings. They belong to me. So wouldn't it be really quite remarkable and quite potentially valuable to find out that those assumptions might not be true? I mean, any one of those assumptions might be helpful to find out. So let's see what we can find out. Okay, so I'm the one who has the problem here. I have these feelings. I don't like this situation. I need this person to be different. I need them to behave differently, understand things differently, think differently, etc. So is that true? Is that true that I am that person? Well, again, there are a lot of ways to take this apart and to look at it. We can look at it from so many angles. So I'm not proposing that in the next 12, 14 minutes that we can necessarily get to all of them, not even by a long shot, but we could just start the process of starting to tease it apart a bit so that we can just start to be open to seeing things in a way that will be more helpful, that will open us to the larger context so that we can receive the value that we're here to receive. So is it true that I need this person to be different? Might initially think, well, of course it is. I definitely need them to be different. This person's an idiot. Everybody knows that. This person's an idiot. They're clearly wrong. They're mean. They're behaving badly, and they don't agree with me. What is so clear, obvious? I mean, what? Case closed. But if we look more sincerely, we have to start to see, well, when I believe that I need this person to be different. So here we, what I didn't anticipate this, but it turns out that what I'm applying here is the work of Byron Katie. So you could loosely, but you could use those questions. Some of you may be familiar with that, some of you will not, but it's just one framework that can be helpful for looking at these kinds of things. So here is it true that I need this person to be different? It's the first question. And you might say, well, it's perfectly obvious I need them to be different. Case closed. In which case, you ask yourself this next question. Well, how do I know that that's true? The idea here is just to start to open yourself up so that you're not so rigid. You're not making the assumption in a knee-jerk reaction way, but you can actually start to be intelligent, open, creative. You can start to see that you are a creative agent in your life, that you have volition, but it's different than how you imagined. We normally think the only way I could have volition is if I could just be the ruler of everything. I mean, I just need to just steamroll over everything, and then I would know that I'm the ruler of everything. Then I have real volition. This person's an idiot. I'm just going to let them know, and then they'll change. And wouldn't that be wonderful? Hey, you're an idiot. I don't agree with you. And they just say, oh, thanks for letting me know. Now that I've seen the light, I'll just bow down to you forever. Is there anything I could do for you right now? Would you like me to shine your shoes? But that's not what we really want. That's not the real power that we want. We actually have volition, but it's different. The volition that we have is we have the ability to change our mind. A much more wonderful power. Because then we start to realize bit by bit that this whole life that I've been imagining, the whole thing entirely has been in my imagination. And when I change my mind, it all changes. So when I ask this question, I say, okay, is it true that I need this person to change? You might say, yeah, it's definitely true. I really definitely need them to change. I'm so tired of this moron bothering me, always interfering with my happiness and my good and my everything. They're just an obstacle. And you say, okay, you're a hard case, but let's keep trying. How do I know that that's true? You just have to say, well, I don't know that I don't know how I know it's true. I mean, come on, I don't know how does anybody know anything? Okay, so you got me. It's an assumption. I'm assuming that I need them to be different. Okay, fine, I'll play along. So now you're ready for the next question. When I believe, when I believe this other person needs to be different, when I believe they need to change, when I believe that they're the problem, how do I feel? And how do I behave? Oh, well, I feel pretty bad. I feel stuck. I feel powerless. I feel frustrated. I feel angry. I feel hurt. I feel fearful. Fearful. It's well, here I am, no exit. It's just going to be more miserable life. Just more. Not one more example of how life is just difficult, unfair, pointless. So I feel bad. I don't really behave in the way that is congruent with my values. Who do I want to be? Who do I know myself to be in my heart? I mean, in your heart, don't you know yourself to be genuinely a good person? Not good by external standards, but good, like your heart is good. You love, you care. And so you know yourself to be that, but here you are acting like a jackass. Maybe not you. Maybe it's just me. But I've seen some other people, I'm pretty sure, were acting in ways that they would have to admit that it was pretty much could be labeled as jackass behavior. Okay, so I'm pretty sure I'm not the only one. Sometimes we act like jackasses, and we we know it's not true of our heart, but here we are behaving in this way. So when I believe this other person is the cause of my problem and I believe they need to change, I feel bad and I act like a jackass. Oh, and then I feel even worse because now I know that I'm acting badly, incongruent with who I know myself to be in my heart. So, now we've gotten further along in our line of questioning. We've opened ourselves up a bit, hopefully, starting to see maybe this assumption is not so helpful. But now that I've realized I don't really, this is not a helpful assumption, I still might not have particular clarity about what else might be possible. How could I get myself unstuck from this? I'm so accustomed to making this assumption. I've made this assumption every day of my life. Haven't we, you look and see, there's got to be some people or circumstances or organizations or something that you have every single day of your life made the assumption that they were responsible for your problem, that if only they would change, then you would be okay. And so you realize, holy cow, I am so practiced at this. I've been doing it probably not even just every day, but many times every day, hundreds of times every day, thousands of times every day. Add that up. It's a lot of practice. I am an expert, a real expert at this bad assumption. So, how can I get myself unstuck? What hope do I have of getting unstuck from this? Well, so then we want to look and see. Okay, just now we've seen the power of assumption. Assumption can absolutely ruin our lives, just devastate our lives. But it can also be a helpful tool. It's just, let's say it's a tool, typically used unconsciously in destructive ways, but we could use it in a constructive way. It's like a knife is a tool, can be used to slice an apple, it could be used to murder. Um, does that make the knife bad? No. It's just a tool that can be used for productive things, helpful things, good things, or not. So here, assumption, despite the fact that an assumption makes an ass out of you and me, which is cute, it's just a tool. So we've blamed unfairly the tool, it's the use of the tool that makes it whatever it is. So we typically use it unconsciously. So an unconscious assumption makes an ass out of you and me, but we can use this tool of assumption to our benefit. So assume instead, what could I just imagine the possibility? I mean, it's just a fantasy. I'm not suggesting that it could actually happen, but just in fantasy land, what would it be like if I could no longer do that? If I could no longer believe that this other person needed to change? What if that could just somehow magically occur? So that I would still find myself in this situation where this person is doing whatever they're doing or saying whatever they're saying or not agreeing with me or whatever it is. But I was actually incapable. This is just fantasy, not reality, but just in fantasy, I was actually somehow suddenly struck by lightning, incapable, couldn't even cross my mind the possibility that there was something wrong with this other person, that there was any possibility that they were a problem for me, that they needed to change in any way. What might be different? I'll leave that to you to answer for yourself, but you force yourself through this little exercise to start to entertain something different. You're just in fantasy, of course, not in reality, but just in fantasy, you're depriving yourself of what it is that you have defaulted to, become unhealthfully dependent upon. So you're forcing yourself to consider something new. Now, at first, you might be a bit slow with this. You might be like, you're scratching your head. I don't know. What would I do? It's nothing. There's no other possibility. But if you sincerely entertain it, you start to realize, holy cow, there are other possibilities. I might start to see this other person in a completely different way. More importantly, and this is really getting to the point, I might start to see myself in an entirely different way. Holy cow. See, before I was assuming that, remember, I know who I am. I am this person who's being victimized. I'm this person who's frustrated. I'm this person who's powerless because this other person is causing me these problems. This other person is causing me to feel bad. This other person is causing me delay in gratification. This other person is whatever. I'm perceiving myself as being a victim. I'm perceiving myself as being powerless. I'm perceiving myself as being lacking in creativity, creative power, volition. I'm perceiving myself as being rigid. This is who I am. Is it any surprise that as people get older, on average, they become more rigid? It's not because we are destined to become more rigid. It's just because we tend to box ourselves in more and more by making more and more assumptions more firmly, unhelpful assumptions, limiting assumptions, so that we become more rigid, not in reality, but in our perception of ourselves. And so we act that out. But here we have this possibility by questioning the assumptions of reclaiming our authentic power. So what the benefit of this is, well, it's huge. But among the benefits is that, see, instantaneously, I become aware and demonstrate, prove positively to myself the truth of this fact that I am powerfully creative. See, an instant prior to this questioning of the assumption, I was perceiving myself as being lacking in volition, lacking in creativity, lacking in power. I was a victim. And it's not just I just gave the one example so that we could explore it in a concrete way, but you'll open it up and see that this is true of everything. Anytime you make an assumption about who you are and you end up in experiencing um, uh, unhappiness or poverty, impoverished consciousness, or uh, enmity, or any of these kinds of things. As a result, you have imagined yourself to be a powerless victim. But in an instant, by simply questioning sincerely the assumption about who you are in the situation and what your relationship is to this person, place, thing, situation, or whatever, you instantly awaken and demonstrate your authentic creative power, and you liberate yourself. So you prove to yourself in that instant, it's not theoretical, it's proven, because you're experiencing the reality of it, that you have that creative power, that you can shape and reshape yourself and your experience by way of your perception, your imagination, your beliefs. And so you don't have to then, wait. Like I said, you don't have to go waiting 50 years to redeem this. Instantly, you have it proven to yourself that you have this authentic creative power, that you are a creative being. That is your nature. It's not something that you have to develop. Oh, you can certainly develop your skills consciously, but the function of being a creative being is inherent in you. You are that. You cannot develop your creative capacity. You already are infinitely creative. It's just that you have unwittingly and unconsciously been abusing your creative faculties to become more rigid in ways that are painful. But instantly you prove and demonstrate to yourself the reality that I am a creative being. I am I am demonstrating to myself that I was creating in an unconscious way and in a painful way through my assumptions, my wrong assumptions about who I was as a victim. And instantly, simply by questioning that, I reveal that I have the capacity to liberate myself and to recreate myself. So you can, so hopefully that makes clear some of the practical benefits of this. But wait, there's more. Because you see, if you really sincerely apply this, then you can change everything in your life. I think it was, oh, I don't know if it was last week or the week before, I had suggested, I think it was 2 weeks ago, I had suggested the benefit of, uh, of being aware of the breath. And sometimes I think or suspect or have concern that sometimes people might um, not see the connectedness of these various ways of exploring or seeing the same thing. So I'm not talking about two different things here. I'm not saying, okay, now drop that thing from before and now do this new thing. They go together. They're the same thing. So to pause and be aware of your breath is also a very powerful way of questioning your assumption about who you are. So and it naturally feeds into uh, this basic process that I'm describing today. So you can use both together in very powerful ways. So practically speaking, how can you apply this to get benefit in your life? So if you are not, if you're happy, if you're feeling like you're on top of the world, there's no problems, everything's great, then what do you need? You don't need anything, you're fine. But anytime that you perceive that there's pain, suffering, distress, frustration, impatience, anger, these kinds of things, then here's simple process that you could apply. Step one, notice your breathing. Just note, keep your attention on the breath. So you just notice that you're breathing, not thinking that you're breathing, but just actually be aware. Give your full attention to it. So you want to really start to become very intimate with the experience. Notice there's a huge difference between thinking about it and actually being intimate with the experience. So I'm talking about intimacy with the experience, to be aware of your breath. You might find it helpful initially close the eyes and you just notice the actual intimacy of that experience of inhalation, the sensation. Perhaps you notice the relative coolness of the air as it passes through the nostrils, how far interior to your sense of yourself can you experience that sensation of the in-breath without trying to control it, without trying to breathe in a particular way or in what you think is the right way, but just through being very intimate with the experience, very curious about it. You start to notice it and it will start to change, not because you're changing it, but because you're aware of it. And so that intimacy with your breath, the whole process, to be really intimate with it, to really experience it, to notice where does the breath go, not as a theoretical question, but as a direct experience, to notice where is the breath, where does it travel to, where is it experienced, what is that experience, what is that sensation, what are the qualities of it, to notice that. And not to notice it so that you can arrive at the right answer, but to notice it for its own sake, because it's a rich experience. That's what I'm talking about. It's like you could talk all day about asking somebody about what is a sunset. You imagine you've never experienced a sunset. You just ask all day, asking questions. What are the colors and what are all the what you keep asking questions about it and just like useless. But then you could just be there with the experience and it's ecstatic. You could be there and be thinking about it and thinking about your day and what you're going to do tomorrow and how that person said this thing to you and what you're going to say to them and how dare they, and maybe you need to get more money and your health, this, that, and the other thing, and then you miss the whole thing. But if you're just there, then you are one with it, you're intimate with it, it's a blissful experience. So this is the secret, is that you can have that anytime. It's not exclusive to the breath, but the breath is always usually here. So it's a wonderful opportunity to just give your attention to that. So that's step one. Now, you might not need a step two. Maybe step one is all that's needed. And in some sense, that's true. But also, um, in a practical way, a lot of the time we need step two because we give our attention to the breath and we're doing that for a while, but then we lose that. We start thinking again and we fall back into the same patterns, same assumptions. So then step two is question the assumption. Use the simple process that I described today. It's just you can, I'm not inviting anybody to join the cult of Byron Katie. It's not an endorsement of the cult of Byron Katie, but the the questions themselves, the simple process is very helpful. So you could use that process. Just ask yourself those questions. Is it true? How do I know that it's true? How do I feel and behave when I believe that this is true? And who would I be if somehow miraculously I was no longer able to believe that? And if you just apply yourself to that sincerely, then you'll find that big changes start to take place in small ways, maybe, but very powerful because you're no longer uh, m- misusing your creative faculties to imprison yourself. Instead, you're consciously using your creative faculties, reawakening your creative faculties consciously so that you can liberate yourself from all of the erroneous beliefs that you had and the wrong assumptions that you were unconsciously making about life. And you really demonstrate to yourself that you are an infinitely creative being, that there, this whole experience, everything that you experience is a creative act. It's a work of art that is intimate with you, and that you have the ability to, you say, create, or at the very least co-create, by simply changing your mind. And that's something that all of us have the ability to do, uh, always. So hope that that is clear. I hope that that is the practical application is clear, and the practical benefits are clear, because it will immediately uh, help you to shift from wrongly perceiving yourself as a victim. Oh, but one other thing about this, just again, took all this time about the context. So this will help you to realize the context, the larger context of your life, because when we make the wrong assumptions about who we are, then we're always thinking, oh, I am this person. I know who I am. I am this person. I know who I am. And then that's the starting point for everything. And so all of our needs and desires are rooted in that. And then we get ourselves into trouble because we pursue things that aren't really in our best interest, because we're failing to recognize what we really want. And we can't know what we really want if we have a misunderstanding of who we are. Because obviously, if we think that we're somebody else, we're going to want the things that that person would want. So we have to get this clarity on who we are, but through this clarity of who we are, then what we want becomes clearer, and we start to realize that all along, what I want is to learn. It's like a funny thing. All I really want is to learn so that I stop making mistakes. And that might seem like, how could that be enough? But actually, it's ecstatic. You start to realize that I've been I've been hurting so much because I keep making the same mistakes. And boy, is that painful. You keep making the same mistakes, it hurts so badly. But and then we don't want to make any mistakes. Then we're terrified of making mistakes. Of course, then we're making the fatal mistake. Talk about rigidity. You don't want to. It's like they say that falls are a big problem as people age. It's true only contextually, but in a certain context, there's a truth to that. But the thing is that when people know that or believe that, then what they do is they start to fear falling. So they become more rigid, trying to brace themselves against falling, and that makes them more likely to fall. Not only that, it makes them more likely to get injured when they fall. So it becomes a vicious cycle. And in the same kind of way, when we're terrified of making mistakes because we know that it hurts so much to make mistakes, we make more mistakes and they hurt even more. So it's a terrible vicious cycle. But we can liberate ourselves from that, and we can start a virtuous cycle where we realize making mistakes is not a problem. Making the same mistakes is a terrible problem. Making mistakes to a certain extent is not problematic. I mean, of course, we don't want to make big, terrible mistakes, but you're an intelligent person. You're not likely to do that. So making small mistakes is not catastrophic. Making small mistakes is, in another way of seeing it, is known as learning. And so, we want to learn, we want to grow, we want to discover, we want to continue to refine our understanding, we want to see more clearly. It's like such a joy. Imagine that, and they say that uh, the the bliss of enlightenment is, if you were to take all of the joy, all of the happiness, all of the pleasure, all of the ecstasy of every human, uh, past, present, and future combined times a million, that is one drop in the ocean of the bliss of the truth of who you are. And so, we're, and that it's ever expanding. So it's infinite and ever expanding. Infinity ever becoming more infinite. So, you imagine the most pleasurable experience that you've ever had. And now think that that's only the beginning. You imagine you've had, the best orgasm of your life, or the best sunset you've ever witnessed, or the whatever, the most intimate embrace with a loved one, most whatever it is, the most rewarding experience of accomplishment, whatever it is, that's the greatest that you've ever experienced. That's only the beginning, and that you can continue to expand and grow and open to infinitely greater expanses of bliss. And so then, rather than being fearful of making mistakes, we can start to embrace the whole process rather than looking at this whole thing as a no exit situation. We can start to see it in a more helpful way and realize this is a perfect opportunity to uh, evolve into uh, greater and greater, infinitely greater experiences of bliss, all by being open to learning. So that not everything that happens, every moment, every experience, no matter what, I can start to realize and be open to it as an opportunity for me to learn, as an opportunity for me to expand and grow into my greater potential. And to the degree that I experience pain, discomfort, distress, etc., it's only a misunderstanding. It's growing pains. It's a mistake for me then to say, oh no, I need to protect myself against this. Hold on, let me get really rigid. Instead, we want to go the other direction. We want to start to question, okay, what am I believing about myself here? It's totally unhelpful. I'm believing that I'm this limited person who's not supposed to experience any kind of discomfort or have any of my assumptions challenged ever. I'm supposed to always be right about everything exactly as I believe or imagine it to be. Uh, there's nothing beyond my ideas of anything, that I'm the final authority on all things, that there's, no greater horizons. Boy, those are really unhelpful assumptions. But when I question them, I start to realize, oh, then, there certainly is a very real possibility. And in fact, I'm experiencing it as real right now, that I I can expand into something greater. I can experience the relief, the joy of that. I can experience the ecstasy of not knowing and of discovering, of finding out that I was mistaken, what a relief, what happiness that is. So that when we understand this whole process can lead us to a greater understanding of the larger context, so that rather than feeling that I'm stuck in this no exit situation, I can really start to appreciate and be enthusiastic about the gift that is this life. And that's all possible. That's possible now. It's possible for you. And it's possible for that to uh, be just the beginning. So that's it for today. Thank you for joining as always. I hope that this has been enjoyable, profitable, pleasurable. And for those who are here live, if you have any questions or comments or anything, I'm happy to stay on for Q&A. Otherwise, also happy to go have lunch. But I'm going to end this video now. So thank you.